Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Abby.
And I'm Jay.
And I'm Fletcher.
And today's story is about Deborah.
Or is it about Deborah?
I'm saying Deborah.
Deborah.
Debbie.
I've heard it both ways.
There's a song,
Yes.
I'm sure, about Debbie.
There's Deborah's song, and she sings a song when she's done.
Oh, Deborah's, Judges
Yeah.
5.
Right?
Yeah, come on, guys.
But
That's
I mean,
a song.
I know where you were going. Pop culture reference.
Abby always
I
sings
don't
the
know
song.
a Debbie song.
There's
There's a
Little
movie.
Debbie's. There's like
Little-
those cakes.
yeah.
Oh, yes.
I don't think anybody's
Let's not
written a
talk
song about Little Debbie cakes.
Well, maybe a jingle about them, though.
I'm sure somebody has eaten a Little Debbie cake and
wanted to sing a
sung a
Little
song.
Debbie.
There it is, Little Debbie. That's the jingle. Abby's going to be on Spotify.
That's right.
On the Abby Fletcher. Sorry, Abby
That's
Bennett.
not my
Excuse
name,
me.
yeah.
Wow.
Come on.
Abby Bennett. I just wanted to say my name, too.
You should
Okay.
say your name.
We have a
Let's get to
question. When has there been a time when you have underestimated somebody
And been proven wrong.
and been proven wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fletcher, you go first.
All right, mine has actually taken place relatively recently. Riley and I and a couple other friends, we went to this escape room. And I'm not a huge fan of escape rooms because I always either feel dumb or I'm like, I always feel dumb after. I'm like, I could have figured that out. And we were in the middle of this escape room, and there was this sign that had these phrases on it and numbers related to the phrases. And then
Right.
we heard this message, and it was just like a doctor repeating these commands. And then I'm listening to it. I'm like, this is a bunch of gibberish. Like, this means nothing. And I'm sitting there for 5 minutes going, what the heck are we supposed to do next? And then Riley goes, oh, that was on that sign back there. And I go, oh, it was. And I saw it, and I looked at it, and I read that entire sign, and I didn't notice. And then she goes, and she solved the puzzle, and we got out. So I underestimated my ability. I didn't underestimate my ability.
Right.
I had no ability. I underestimated.
You overestimated.
I did. Overestimated myself. Underestimated Riley's detective skills.
Did you think you guys were just going to be stuck in there forever?
I didn't know. Well, they say, the door's not locked, but you can't walk out of there unscathed. You just feel shame of failure if you walk out. But we did get out, and it was a lot of fun. But
Okay. Abby?
Yeah, mine's not funny. Mine's just I've had a lot of people that I work with that I've come in for a job interview, and I hear some of their stories, and I'm like, oh man, like this is going to be rough. And then they just come in and they do so well, and they totally blow my expectations out of the water. So I'm not going to give specifics because privacy,
Sure.
but just so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if this is necessarily underestimated, but I would say maybe exceeded expectations. So
Okay.
we have had at least two of our youth who have stepped up and joined our Sunday morning worship teams. And I've been incredibly impressed by their ability to play and to hear the music as well, and to play so worshipfully, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And just as you guys were sharing, I did think of a really funny one where I underestimated and I was proven wrong. So when we lived in Quebec, we used to leave our house. We'd go across the road to the Bible school, the center where I worked, and that was where our community was. So we did a lot of community, like we had meals over there and whatnot. And so we would go over, and there was a period of time where my boys were very forgetful, and they would run back to the house to get something, and then they'd come back and they would leave the door wide open. And because we're in the woods in Quebec, it didn't matter. Like, no people are going into, but animals or whatever, right? So, and so one day we're walking back to the house, and I'm like, boys, I've told you guys so many times, you got to close the door. And
it's the classic. The heat's getting out.
yeah,
I'm paying for that electricity.
Yeah, well, and it was more, we heated with wood and stuff too. But anyways, my one son, okay, I'll say it was Nathan.
No.
It was Nathan. He said, no, Daddy, it wasn't us. It was Toots.
You've told this story.
Toots was our cat. I haven't told it on the
I
podcast,
thought-
so I don't think.
Well,
right?
last week, if you remember, Jay talked about his toots a little bit as well, but it's the cat this time.
That's right.
not-
That's right. And
his
Toots got the name because when we got Toots, he had a lot of gas. But so he says, "No, Daddy, it was Toots." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Toots opened the door." I said, "No, Toots didn't open the door. Toots is a cat. You guys need to stop leaving the door open. That's enough." And he said, "No, Daddy, it was Toots." I said, "Nathan, you need to stop right now. I'm done having this
Don't blame the
conversation.
cat."
Stop blaming the cat.
Nice.
You guys need to stop blaming. No, Daddy, I saw him." I said,
It's doubling down on it.
"Yeah."
Ooh.
And so that was where I pulled out the loud voice and said, "That's enough. The conversation has ended. I don't want to hear any more about a cat opening the door. Don't do it again." And that was that. The next day, I'm sitting on the couch and I hear ka-thunk, ka-thunk. And then I see Toots walking into the house because Toots, the cat,
Can open the door.
can open the door. So it was one of these door handles that it's like a lever, and he would jump up and he would pull the handle down when he jumped up, and the door would open and in he would walk. So I had to change the doorknob because so there were times where
So you underestimated
underestimated Toots the cat because he could open the door. There was one time where I heard the ka-thunk and I get up and I open the door, and when I opened it, he was mid jump. He's like swiping at nothing because I pulled the door open, and
That's funny.
so
I
I
have experience-
underestimated a cat.
Nice. I have experience with animals opening and closing doors, but and it involves raccoons. But that's
Raccoons
for
and-
another
yes.
time, I'm sure.
Oh
Another
yeah.
time.
When have you been embarrassed by an animal?
Oh,
I'll tell that
man.
story, if it's ever a question.
All right, so you can let us know if there's a time where you underestimated somebody and they proved you wrong or exceeded your expectations. And yeah, we'd love to hear about that. And of course, we do always encourage you to read the stories for yourselves in order to get the whole picture of what is going on. And today's story, just like last week, takes place in the book of Judges.
Judges.
So we continue on, and today's story is about a female prophet and judge of Israel named Deborah.
We love her.
And once again, so as I said, we're still in the book of Judges. Since last week's story of Ehud, there's been peace in the land of Israel for 80 years. And Ehud is now dead, and we are told that once again Israel has done evil in the sight of the Lord. And this time, God turns them over to a Canaanite king called Jabin of Hazor. And Jabin had a general named Sisera who led his armies and oppressed Israel ruthlessly. And they were in control of Israel for 20 years before the people of Israel cry out for help from God, which is where we pick up today's story.
Absolutely. So last week we talked about Ehud, and I think I said that's 1250, something like that BC. Today's story is like 1200 to 1150. We said 80 years plus another 20 years of
Right.
oppression, something like that. So it's been about 100 years since the beginning of Ehud's story. And once again, the Israelites have claimed Canaan as their land, but there's a lot of other kingdoms and a lot of conflict in the area. Right now, Israel, like we said, is oppressed by Jabin of Hazor, and he says that he has 900 iron chariots.
Yeah.
And so this story is actually taking place in history at a time, it's called the end, or the Bronze Age collapse, and it's just as the Iron Age is starting to start. And so iron tools are becoming more available
Right.
and useful. And so Jabin has access to this iron and now has a huge advantage over the Israelite people because he has these iron chariots.
Yeah.
So they're now in a bad spot. Israel's in a bad spot. They have a huge technological disadvantage when it comes to war. So who's going to save them is the big question now.
Yeah.
Right? Only God can deliver them is what we're hoping anyway.
Yes, so Hazor is home of King Jabin, and it's located in northern Israel, north of the Sea of Galilee, and it's actually one of the largest biblical era sites in Israel today. It's called Tel Hazor, and there's some archaeological and excavation digs still going on there. So Deborah lives in the country of Ephraim near Bethel, which is north of Jerusalem, and west of the Jordan River, which is, we know, in modern-day Israel. And then the battle takes place near Mount Tabor, and it's just west of the Sea of Galilee and east of Nazareth.
Absolutely. So we get to our main protagonist of today. the unlikely Deborah.
Or Deborah.
Deborah. And she is the wife of a man named Lapidoth, and she is now like the current prophet and judge of Israel. And it says she sits at the tree of Deborah and judges Israel. So
Right.
she's not necessarily a military leader, but
Right.
she is somebody who is a spiritual leader and kind of the ruling authority in Israel right now.
A prophetess.
A prophetess, yes. So Deborah ends up sending for a man named Barak, and he's the son of Abinom. Anyway, again, we're not pronunciation
Say confidently.
masters.
Just
Abinom.
give her.
And he's of the tribe of Naphtali. Now, you don't hear about Naphtali very
No.
often, but it is a tribe,
Yep.
and Barak is in it. So he sends for this man to go get 10,000 soldiers from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. And he's to go with those 10,000 men to Mount Tabor, and God will bring out Sisera and with all his chariots, and he's going to give you victory.
Mhm.
God's going to be the one who gives you victory.
Yeah.
And this is what Deborah tells him, and Barak's like, okay, I believe you, but I want Deborah, I want you to come with me, because, we got to have God's prophet on our side and have her with
Right.
us, and that's how we know.
Which, yeah, but anyway, she's told you you're going to win. Anyways.
Yeah. It almost reminds you of, we got to bring the Ark of the Covenant
That's
with
right.
us, right? And
That's
later on I'm sure you've heard about the Ark of the Covenant. The Israelites bring it with them in the battle. And
Thinking that they need
that's
it
what's gonna
physically
make
with
them
them. And yep.
So
yep.
they're thinking, Deborah, she's the prophet of God. She's going to make us win.
Yeah.
And Deborah agrees. She goes, yeah, I'll come with you. But now that you've done this, the glory of the battle is going to go to a woman.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody's assuming that
It's
that
gonna
woman
be Deborah.
is going to be Deborah.
Yeah.
So Barak goes and rallies all the troops, goes to Mount Tabor with Naphtali and Zebulun, all the men, 10,000. And when Sisera hears that he's assembled an army, he heads down with his soldiers and his chariots, his 900 iron chariots and his warriors. And then Barak is told by Deborah, today is the day that God will deliver you, and you're going to go win the battle. God is going to go ahead of you and win the war.
Nice.
So here we go. Barak's men, they all charge at Sisera and the army. And as they attack, God puts this panic on Sisera's men and all his chariots and warriors and causes like this panic and mass confusion going on to the point where Sisera actually ends up jumping off his chariot and running off on
Right.
foot. And Barak and all his men attack, and there's this crushing defeat of Sisera's army. And so later on, Sisera's running for his life, terrified. And he runs into this tent of a woman named Jael. And it just so happens that there's this guy named Heber, and he's a descendant of Moses' brother-in-law, and he's living in the area.
Right.
And so Sisera ends up at Jael, who's his wife, and says, can I enter? And Jael and Heber had a good relationship with King Jabin, so they let him in.
Mm-hmm.
And Jael gives him this blanket and gives him something to drink, and eventually Sisera falls asleep, which was a mistake apparently, because Jael, who we see is loyal to Israel, takes a tent peg and a hammer and just hammers it right through his head. Another brutal episode.
Yeah.
Judges is a crazy book. You should read it. There's a lot of crazy stuff. But yeah, takes this tent peg and hammers it right through his head, killing him, of course.
Yeah.
Jael then runs out and finds Barak and says, look, I've delivered Sisera into your hands. The battle's won.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last verses of Judges chapter 4 say, on that day Israel saw God defeat Jabin, the Canaanite king. And from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him.
Right.
Whew.
And then Deborah sang a song.
Deborah did sing a song.
She did.
And the entirety of chapter 5 is a retelling of Deborah's story in this poetic and songful manner.
Yeah.
So what makes Deborah unlikely?
I'll give you two guesses as to
Two.
what makes Deborah unlikely. I'm just kidding. I'm assuming we all have thought of this already, but Deborah is a woman and a female prophet. And
Yeah.
if you've read the Bible, you know that doesn't happen very often.
No.
There are not many female prophets, and she's actually the only female judge in the entirety of the Bible.
The society, not just Israel's, like the culture of Israel and the Jewish people, but all the surrounding nations, all patriarchal. Like it's all about the patriarchs and the men who were important and had any authority or even input or sway in anything. And here comes Deborah, this
Here
woman.
comes. yeah, here comes Deborah. We have this woman who is not only just in charge in like let's say a judicial or a military fashion. She wasn't a soldier, but she was in charge of the armies. But she's also a prophetess, and she talks to God and actually says this prophecy. If you remember a couple minutes ago, we said, and the honor of the battle is going to go to a woman.
Yeah.
And now we assumed it was going to be Deborah, but then fast forward and we see that Jael is the one who wins the day.
Right.
And so there's another woman in this story that is unlikely, and she's
Yeah.
the one who gets the glory of winning the battle and defeating the enemy
Yeah.
of Israel.
And that also makes Deborah unlikely even in the book of Judges, because often it's the judge themselves that we see are the instrument which God uses in order to free his people from the oppression that they're under. And in this instance, he doesn't use her. He uses her words, or he gives her words and messages to share, and she ends up directing Barak and saying, like, today is the day. But the actual liberation doesn't come through her, it comes through somebody else.
Yeah, or through the expected judge, or
Yeah.
through the expected military leader, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's coming through some unexpected woman, Jael.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does this story help to fulfill the story of God throughout the rest of the Bible?
So yeah, I mean, obviously we've talked about how it's unexpected and how that fits into today's season, but it just shows that God isn't using the strong always. He's not using the best of the best. He's using whoever is faithful to follow him. This whole season we've talked about unexpected and not necessarily the strongest people. Like we talked about Ehud was just the smallest tribe and this left-handed guy. We've talked about Moses, who, ran away and is a murderer. And so now we have, first of all, a female prophet named Deborah, and then we also have just this woman who was in her tent minding her own business, doing God's will for his country, for their country. So,
and I think we see the start of something that we see continued throughout the Bible and through the story of God is actually an empowering of women, which we don't see in other cultures.
At the time.
Yeah, and so we see Jesus empowers women in his ministry. Paul empowers women in his ministry. Sometimes we can take some of the words of Paul, and sometimes they get used to maybe even suppress the gifts of women, but I think that he's written them for the purpose of actually exalting and giving women a place in ministry. And so I think we see very clearly with Deborah here and
I think we've had a few other
Scripture
episodes about women as well, where we point out, I think we did the daughters of Zelophehad,
right
had an impact on the whole law of Israel, but
the so
empowering.
in the grand story of all of Scripture and the story of God, women have a place, and they should never believe or feel that they don't, or that they're not important because they're women.
And there's that famous verse that we've been doing. In Christ there is no Jew nor Greek, and one of those is male nor female.
Male nor female, yeah.
God's gift applies to everybody.
Yep.
So use that if you're a woman, and if you're a man.
That's right.
Yay.
If you are human.
There we go.
You are human. Yeah, even if you're a cat, you can.
No,
you can
unless
open
you're
doors.
Toots, and you're
if
pretty
you're Toots,
smart.
you can open doors. But
Or if you're the donkey, you can talk.
that's right.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
boy.
If you have a talking donkey.
All right. Well,
Anyway.
that concludes our episode for today. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry for getting off track. Thanks for listening, though. Hope you come back next week.
Yeah. Bye for now.